Hi everybody, and welcome to the first lecture of Screencast in this year's module. This is PO3 USF, that is essentially US foreign policy since 1950. I am Dr. Graham O'Dwyer, and you've all made a very sensible decision, I feel, to study this subject area of international relations over the next few months. So already a big sort of well done on that. Now at heart, this is a sort of 13-week module that explores how US foreign policy is made. It explores why the US acts as it does on the world stage, and how US foreign policy has essentially developed since the 1950s. Now, the module doesn't require you to have an in-depth understanding of US foreign policy already. You don't really need an extensive knowledge of US domestic political institutions, and you don't need to be a superstar student on all elements of international relations. In fact, all you need is a keen interest in this subject matter, a commitment to getting through the core reading material that I assign, and to keep up with the lectures and seminars each week. Okay, so what are we looking at this week in our first introductory set of screencasts? Well, there are essentially two sections to this week's lecture material, and rather than put these all together in one single sort of 1-hour package, I've split these down into two smaller parts that we're calling screencasts. I think that's a term you should be familiar with already as we move into the academic year. And these should run for around about 20 to 25 minutes each. And this is a structure that I'll try to keep running for the whole module, so you'll be able to sort of watch these as and when you like. And some weeks it may be 2 screencasts, others it may be 3 or 4, but you should watch these in order, and you shouldn't really leave too much time between these. That said, if you watch one and you don't get to the next one for a few hours or maybe a day or two, it's really no big deal. Just watch all of the screencasts before you come to class, whether that is face-to-face here on the university campus or indeed online. And I kind of guess this year is going to be, pretty maybe difficult or challenging for all of us, but I think we just need to sort of plow on ahead and kind of see how we do as the weeks progress. So this week we have our 2 screencasts, and in this first one we're just going to talk. We're going to sort of go over the module introduction in a general sense and talk about why it's important to study US foreign policy. Now, you may major in international relations, you may be a student primarily of international history, it may be US politics or international law. In many ways, it really doesn't matter, as knowing something of US foreign policy is useful for all these subject areas. And as we move into our second screencast of the week, we'll start to look at the specific structure of the module in terms of content, in terms of readings, and in terms of the assessment. And while this is kind of admittedly a little bit dry, it is important and useful information to kind of take on board at this early stage of the course. Hence, the learning outcomes for this week are to first understand the module in terms of its content and structure. Second, to understand the assessment of the module and how this works in practice. And third and finally, to better appreciate the importance of studying US foreign policy today. And each week I'll try to say a little bit about learning outcomes, even if, again, these are a little bit dry. But I think this sort of thing keeps the university admin staff happy, so we'll just run through them quickly at the start of each screencast. Okay, so many of you will know me already after taking my modules over the past few years, either on American government or international relations theory. But some of you I won't know at all. either way, you're all most welcome on the module. But I feel it's useful here just to give an overview of my contact details, I should say, and just to kind of give you a sense of who I am as a lecturer here at Reading. Most of this is also in the module outline, which is up on Blackboard, and you should all kind of familiarise yourself with that as a a first thing to do for the module if you've not already done that. So my email address, should you want to run anything by me, is up on the screen here. That is g.m.o'dwyer@reading.ac.uk. Whilst my Skype handle is also up on the screen. So I'll also be running my online office hours over this semester, which take place on Fridays from 1 till 3 p.m. Most of the time I'll run through to 4 p.m. On a Friday. So officially 1 till 3, but actually in practice round about 1 till 4. Here you'll need to book a slot, and then we can speak either on Skype or via Teams at a time that we that mutually works for both of us. And we're still looking into this system at the moment and how it all works. So if anything changes, I will try to keep you posted. But for those of you who are really keen to talk face to face, and why the university is still allowing that, I'm happy to talk to you face to face in my office. Although again, you will need to book a specific slot, as it were. For what it's worth, my office is 405 up in Edith Morley, which is right at the top of the a highly annoying tower. And I've also put a link up here to my staff page should you want to find out more details on me, or you want to maybe look at my most recent publication, which was on Franco-American relations during the 1960s. Now, as well as teaching US foreign policy and American government, I also teach IR theory and foreign policy analysis to the British Army and to new officers in particular that have recently graduated from the Royal Military Academy at Sandhurst. Hence, I tend to split my teaching time between undergraduates and British Army officers. And just to note, I will be teaching all lectures and seminars on this module, so it's not team taught in any way. And just as a second side note, and this may seem odd, but I think it's useful to say, I also spend a lot of my time rock climbing around the UK and Europe. But while I'm here in Reading, I spend quite a lot of time at the Reading climbing wall, which is pretty close to the university. So if you're a climber yourself and you're ever there, and you just want to come along and say hi or hello, please feel free to do so. As long as we chat about climbing and nothing too heavily academic. Just please take it easy on me if you're smashing out a a 7B route on lead climbing, while I may be struggling with something a little lower down, as it were. I often destroy my hands rock climbing, indoors and outside. So if I have my hands taped up or bandaged up during the videos or in class, then it's really just a reflection of that. I'm not horribly clumsy, as it were. Well, not too clumsy anyway. Okay, before we move on to explore the course structure in specific detail, I just want to spend a little bit of time working through the key reasons that you should study US foreign policy, or to perhaps put it a little differently, offer you a clear reason that justifies your very sensible decision to take this module. So the primary reason for this, I think, is the simplest, and that is, as the most powerful country in the world today, what the US does and what it thinks and what it says really does matter. It's unimportant if it's Trump, Obama, Bush, or Biden if he wins the election next month. It matters for most people in the world, and it certainly matters for our states in the international system. And this is especially so for most of Europe and certainly the UK, It matters to the US's geopolitical rivals such as Russia and China, and it certainly matters for many of the US's allies around the world. In short, if you are a student of international relations, international history, international law, whatever it is, it would be rather unwise, I think, to try to sort of understand the international system of states without understanding the central country that dominates this system. In fact, it's probably no exaggeration to say that, I suppose, over the past maybe 80 years or so, no country has ever held so much international power as the US. And in many ways, we're living largely in, I suppose, unprecedented times. And I think it's fair to say, and as I'll try to argue as we move through the module, that you simply can't understand contemporary international relations without some sort of base knowledge of US foreign policy. Now, this sort of dominance is called US primacy, a term that is best understood, and if I kind of break out a definition that and I've kind of got this on the slide here, but if we understand US primacy as a country's predominant position in the hierarchy of global power, I think this captures that term well. It's a key term, I think, to also keep in mind as we sort of progress through the module, as most scholars, myself included, accept that we do live in an extended period of American primacy, even if there are challenges to this from other states in the system. Of course, I think it's right to say that other powerful countries have existed in the past, but these have often had powerful rivals, such as the sort of the European states of the 19th century, where much of Europe was comprised of powerful states like Great Britain, France, and Spain. But in many ways, these countries sort of quite largely cancelled each other out in a European context. But for what it's worth, this is what we call a multi-polar world order. Now, during the Cold War, the US was powerful, certainly so, but it was challenged by the Soviet Union in what we tend to call a bipolar world order. Yet since the 1990s, the US has pushed itself into a position of such power that we presently live in what we call a unipolar world, where the US has no real serious equal in the world when measured by economic power, military power, diplomatic power, and indeed soft power. Just to give some kind of extra detail to this, or to put some sort of meat on the bones there that I've just highlighted, America's international dominance is expressed in numerous ways, but finds its most sort of forceful expression in its military. I think this is just something we instinctively and intuitively know. Indeed, the US spends an astronomical amount of money on defence, and as you can see here on the slide, on the graph on the left-hand side of the slide, it ranks well above every other country in the world by this metric and this measurement. In fact, we have to put China, India, Russia, Saudi Arabia, France, Germany, the UK, Japan, South Korea, and Brazil together, just to essentially balance out US defence spending. In short, or put another way, over the course of 2019, the US spent $732 billion on defence, while these 10 countries spent $726 billion combined. Now, this may seem like a lot, and it certainly is, but when measured as a percentage of national GDP, it tends to be Saudi Arabia, Israel, and Russia that tend to habitually spend a little bit more than the United States. So I suppose in this sense, military power is only, or the American military power is only a reflection of the US's sort of astronomical economic power, but it is kind of staggering nonetheless. Now, as well as a sort of a raw power of the United States, the country also leads the world's strongest alliance of states. And this we should always keep in mind. This is something we always need to have in our minds when we talk about the United States. So with NATO, or the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, comprising of 30 states, this certainly enhances US global strength in a clear and structured way, but it's simply not available to the US's core rivals. We think about Russia or China. They just simply don't have that alliance of powerful states that they essentially lead, and maybe not necessarily command, but they have huge power and influence over the 29 other member states of NATO. That said, this alliance system does cause tensions between the US and others, and in particular between those states who do not meet the agreed level of defence spending that NATO membership implies. This is one of the sources of contention between the US and Germany today. It is one that Donald Trump keeps coming back to, and there's some good reasons as to why Trump may have a point on all of this. And as you can see from the slide here, there's only a small number of states that actually spend at least 2% of their GDP on defence spending, and the others below, from Romania down to Luxembourg, are those states that simply are not meeting that base criteria of what NATO membership implies. Okay, let's just take a couple of minutes here on this slide to ask what this level of defence spending gets the United States. Well, it gains a lead in many areas such as missile technology and bomber aircraft, but nowhere is this lead more forcefully expressed than its lead in the currency of international power, and that is the immense power and importance of aircraft carriers, which is something we don't often talk about too much when we think about international relations. But as we can see on the slide here, and as measured at the end of 2019, so maybe 10 months ago now, there were 22 aircraft carriers in the world, with the US owning half of these and hence being streets ahead of all other states when measured by this metric of world power. Now, I don't really have time in the screencast here to go into the importance of aircraft carriers to US national security and power, but put briefly, they essentially allow the US to project its power to most places in the world. They give the US the power to place a chokehold on the world's shipping lanes, which is exceptionally important for a country that demands free trade and trading access to most countries in the world. It also allows the US to easily threaten its rivals without doing too much. And these things, most American aircraft carriers, they're almost unsinkable. Seriously, these things are largely impossible to bring down, given just how well built and manufactured they are. In fact, I think it's fair to say that the latest class of the US aircraft carriers, this is the Ford class, largely named after President Ford of the 1970s. These will essentially replace the Nimitz class of carriers and are now the largest, most powerful and highly advanced warships ever built, and essentially act as floating battle stations. Now, Lauren Thomas, who at Forbes magazine, he regularly writes about these, so please have a look at the two links on the slide here if you want to know a little bit more about that. But as well as being able to dominate the world's strategic areas and shipping lanes, much like the British Royal Navy did at the height of its empire, these aircraft carriers also provide American troops with air cover and air support whenever they go ashore. As such, this enhances the power and presence of US ground forces in a way that no other country can match. Either way, so think about how all this compares to China, to Russia, to France, and maybe even the UK. For the most part, their aircraft carriers are so few in number that they really just need to be used to defend the homeland and their own borders, and they're not really able to project military power too far beyond this. In other words, they're mostly used in a defensive way. And think about that for a moment. So we presently live in an era whereby the US is pretty much the only state capable of projecting sustained military power into the international system, but also crucially being able to prevent other states from doing the same in areas that are deemed vital to American key interests. Of course, the UK and certainly France are able to send their aircraft carriers around the world, largely because they have the sort of the benefit of knowing that the American Atlantic fleets can at least cover for them in terms of home defence. This aside, it's fair to say that the US essentially has a monopoly on the ability to project military power into the international system in a sort of extensive and sort of sustained way, and retains the exclusive capacity to fight 2 full-scale wars at the same time in different parts of the globe. And this, just to kind of be clear on this sort of dual war principle is a core component of contemporary US defence planning today, and is one that conditions spending and planning in Washington in just about every single kind of broad strategic meeting that discussions take place. In addition to these aircraft carriers, the US also possesses a huge number of nuclear weapons, second only to Russia. It also has the most highly advanced bomber and fighter aircraft ever developed, and has around 500 military bases around the world. Either way, if you want to see just how important and in some ways impressive this lead is in naval power, there's a really neat war simulation video on YouTube that's run by the Infographics show. It sort of explores the question of who would win between the US and the rest of the world in a sort of an all-out war. Slightly crazy scenario, but I think it sort of hammers home the point quite well. But it shows that the American lead in naval power is the sort of the decisive factor in all this. There's a link to this on the slide here on the sort of a left-hand slide, on the left-hand side of the slide. It's difficult to say. And while this is only optional in terms of your viewing, it's actually a well-considered simulation that sort of drives home the power that the US possesses today and its ability to fight 2 full-scale wars at the same time in different parts of a globe. And I sort of kind of agree with the conclusions here that the US would likely win in this sort of simulation, which is I guess is nice. Okay. Given all this, and sort of from an academic perspective, a number of key questions essentially emerge. In many ways, we'll be looking at these throughout the module. 5, however, I think are critical to think about, and I'll just talk through these as a way of sort of concluding this first screencast. But it also gives you sort of a bit of a heads up in relation to what we're concerned with over the next few months. Well, the first question we have on the slide here is the question of how did the US come to be in this position? In many ways, this is a central part of the modules. We're essentially exploring the development of the sort of power and foreign policy of the United States since the end of the Second World War. So essentially over the past 25 years. The second question, which is largely asked from Washington's perspective today, is how should the US seek to maintain this power gap, and hence how should policy planners keep the notion of American primacy alive? This isn't something that is sort of particular to any specific presidency or party, and although the rhetoric may change from president to president, the policy substance of maintaining US power rarely changes. And if you take Roosevelt, Kennedy, Reagan, Clinton, Bush, Obama, and Donald Trump, all of these essentially have been committed to the central goal of keeping the US as the primary power in international affairs and international relations. And the third question, the final one that we have on the slide here, is one that relates to this, and one that we'll often visit, and which is, and this sort of question is the sort of moral implications of the extent of American power and what sort of responsibilities this demands of the United States today. This is a question we'll touch on a lot in sort of, I suppose, a lot more detail next week. But in short, we may think about how the United States may seek to bring about more democracy in the world through its power that it possesses, how it may seek to sort of increase the amount of global trade, and how much it tries to increase global freedom through its actions in international affairs. Of course, the US often gets things wrong, and things wrong, and I certainly pull no punches when it comes to being critical of US foreign policy, and I suppose Iraq and Vietnam are sort of clear indications of this, two case studies that we'll look at on the module. And here we need to be heavily critical of the US at times. But there's also a strong moral character that sits at the heart of US foreign policy that we'll need to keep in mind as the weeks progress, and we'll talk a little bit more about this over the next 2 or 3 weeks. And I suppose at base the question in this regard is, what should the US seek to do with all this power that it essentially possesses? The fourth question of the 5, and one that relates to this week's reading by Desmond King, is, does all this make the US a contemporary empire? Indeed, given the strength and the sheer power of the US, we may argue that the US is essentially a contemporary empire and a sort of colossal imperial project, and there's sort of many good reasons to think in these terms. At the end of the screencast, and we have a link on the slide here too, there's an animated by Howard Zinn who makes this sort of case in a highly convincing way. So be sure to check this out in a little while. The link is on the slide here, but I think there's also a link on the following slide, which is the last one of the screencast. So feel free to choose either of those. Either watch it now or watch it at the end of the screencast. And this is also sort of narrated, I think, it was narrated by Viggo Mortensen, who played Aragorn in Lord of the Rings. So that makes it pretty cool, just for those particular reasons. Yet for the reading that you'll need to do for this week from Desmond King is that he sort of argues that even though the US is this powerful and this strong and this dominant, this still does not essentially equate to the United States as sort of an empire or an imperial project, largely because it doesn't fit the description and the definition that he sort of works with. And I'll be sort of keen to get your thoughts on this in class later on this week. So essentially there's a sort of tension set up here between Desmond King and Viggo Mortensen on, is the United States a contemporary empire? The final question, and one that we'll think about towards the end of a module, is a question of American decline. Now, this may be sort of a difficult one to get to grips with in some ways, as although we'll spend a good chunk of our time on the module critiquing and criticising US foreign policy, we'll take a look at the implications of American decline and whether this is desirable in our final week of the module. Here we'll mostly think about the work of Robert Kagan, who argues that although the US gets a lot wrong in terms of its foreign affairs and foreign policy, the great advances we've actually seen in global peace and global prosperity since 1945 are a direct consequence of the prevalence of American power over that kind of duration and over that extended period of time. Yet Kagan goes on to argue that should the US decline, the result may be highly undesirable, and a power vacuum that's left behind, and we all know that nature abhors a sort of power vacuum. That the implications here are that this sort of vacuum would be filled by states of maybe a more autocratic nature, maybe Russia or China. Again, I kind of tend to think that Kagan has a point on this, but that's one of those broad questions we need to keep in mind as we progress through the module. Is American decline, despite all its criticisms and despite all our critiques of the United States, is it desirable the United States actually steps back from the world, or its power diminishes to some extent? Okay, well, that's pretty much it for our first screencast of the module. Hopefully it's not been too bad for you guys, even if this is a sort of a new way of learning for all of us. There is one more to go at this week, where I'll talk more sort of specifically about the module content in terms of its structure and the readings and how things will progress. And we'll also talk a little bit about the module assessment and the module outline. But do try to keep the questions that we looked at here in mind, which relate to American power today, but also American power over the last 75 years or so. But before I go, again, just a note to do this week's readings, which can be found on Blackboard, or you can follow a link to the Desmond King article from 2006, which is on the slide here on the left-hand slide. So make sure you go through that article. Like I say, he's keen to argue that the US is not an empire, so read this and be ready to sort of critique it, assess it, agree with it, attack it, whatever it is you make of it. But also be sure to watch the Howard Zinn presentation, as I said before, this gives us a nice and sort of different perspective on things. So happy reading and happy climbing if you do go climbing. I think you all probably should go climbing. And I'll see you all soon for the next highly exciting Screencast 2. So take care, guys, and see you all soon.